In the heart of our small town, nestled among rolling hills, stands an old stone church, St. Jude's. It's a place of quiet history, where every stained glass window tells a story. But the most profound story isn't in the glass or the stone. It's in a single, flickering candle. Every year, on the eve of All Souls' Day, Father Michael performs a simple yet deeply moving ritual. After lighting candles for all the departed souls requested by his parishioners, he takes one last, plain white candle. He walks to a quiet alcove, far from the others, and lights it. He doesn't say a name. He simply whispers, "This is for all who have no one to remember them." A candle for the unknown soul. It was a tradition started by the priest before him, a way to ensure no one was ever truly forgotten. A beautiful, solitary gesture of compassion. But something strange, something wonderful, began to happen. Every year, without fail, moments after Father Michael would turn to leave, that single flame would dance. It would dip and sway, not from a draft or a breeze, but as if someone, somewhere, had just gently blown a kiss of gratitude. The first time it happened, Father Michael dismissed it. The old church was drafty after all. The second year he paused, a curious warmth spreading through his chest. By the third year, it was a quiet miracle he looked forward to. The flicker was gentle, rhythmic, almost like a soft, contented sigh. It was a silent conversation, a thank you from across the veil. Word of the grateful flame, as the townspeople began to call it, spread slowly. It wasn't a spectacle, but a whispered secret, a shared piece of local magic. People would come to the evening service not just to remember their own, but to witness this quiet miracle. They'd stand in respectful silence, watching Father Michael light the candle, and then a collective, gentle gasp would fill the church as the flame began its soft, grateful dance. One year, a young journalist from the city, hearing of the legend, came to debunk it. She brought with her scientific instruments to measure air currents, temperature fluctuations, anything that could provide a rational explanation. She set up her equipment discreetly in the back, her notebook ready, a skeptical glint in her eye. Father Michael performed the ritual as he always did. He lit the candle for the unknown, his voice a soft murmur in the hushed church. He turned away. The journalist, whose name was Clara, watched her instruments. Nothing, no drafts, no change in temperature, all was still. And then it happened. The flame dipped low, once, twice, 3 times, before rising to burn steadily again. It was a clear, deliberate flicker. Clara looked from her perfectly still monitors to the dancing flame, and a shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't a shiver of cold, but of wonder. She saw the faces of the townspeople around her, their expressions not of shock, but of soft, knowing comfort. They weren't looking for proof. They were simply bearing witness. After the service, she approached Father Michael. She didn't ask about drafts or air pressure. Instead, she asked, "Who do you think it is?" The old priest smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Does it matter?" he replied gently. "Perhaps it's a soldier who fell far from home. Perhaps it's an old woman who outlived all her friends. Or maybe," he leaned in slightly, "it's not just one soul. Maybe it's all of them, all the forgotten ones, taking a turn to say thank you." That answer changed something in Clara. Her story, when it was published, wasn't an exposé. It was a poem. It spoke not of science or skepticism, but of the profound human need to remember and be remembered. She wrote about how a community's simple act of compassion could create a space for a miracle, however small. Years passed. Father Michael grew older, his hands a little less steady, but his faith in the ritual never wavered. The town grew, but it never lost its heart. The tradition of the grateful flame became a cornerstone of its identity. It taught the children that every life has value, even those whose stories we don't know. It reminded the adults that the greatest act of love can be a simple gesture of remembrance for a stranger. The candle for the unknown soul wasn't just about the dead. It was about the living. It was a reminder to look out for the lonely, to reach out to those who might feel forgotten in our own communities. The flickering flame was a beacon, not just for a soul in the great beyond, but for the kindness within us all. And so, if you ever find yourself in our little town on All Souls' Eve, come to St. Jude's, join the quiet crowd, and watch. Watch as a single candle is lit for those with no one left to remember them. And as the flame flickers, as it dips and dances in a silent show of thanks, you'll feel it too. The undeniable warmth of a connection that defies explanation. A gentle reminder that no one is ever truly alone, and no act of love is ever, ever wasted. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this story with me. If it touched your heart, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more stories that warm the soul. Until next time, take care and remember to be the light for someone else.
Have you ever felt a connection to the past so strong it sends a shiver down your spine? Deep in the countryside, there's a small stone chapel, unassuming from the outside. But inside, something extraordinary happens. Visitors who kneel in the pews, surrounded by the quiet hum of history, have reported hearing whispers on the air. It's not the wind, they say, but the voices of their ancestors calling their names. For some, it's a moment of profound peace, a feeling of coming home. But for others, the experience is so unsettling, they vow never to return after the sun goes down. What would you hear in the silence of that chapel? Would you feel comfort or a chilling call from beyond? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more mysteries.
Every year, on All Saints' Day, she appeared. A solitary figure, shrouded in the soft, dim light of the old village church, always taking her place in the very last pew. Her presence was a quiet mystery, a local legend whispered among the townsfolk of Oakhaven. She would sit through the entire service, her head bowed in what seemed to be silent, fervent prayer. Her face, etched with a timeless sorrow, was rarely seen clearly, always partially obscured by the shadows or a delicate, old-fashioned veil. The strangest part wasn't her sudden appearance each November 1st, but her disappearance. Parishioners would exchange knowing glances, their curiosity piqued. They would watch her, a still silhouette against the stained glass windows. But the moment the final hymn ended and the congregation began to stir, she would simply be gone. No one ever saw her walk out the heavy oak doors. It was as if she dissolved into the very air of the hallowed space, leaving behind only the scent of old lavender and an unanswered question. This went on for decades. Generations of Oakhaven residents grew up with the story of the lady in the last pew. Children would dare each other to try and speak to her, but a profound, almost sacred respect held them back. There was an aura of deep grief around her, a sorrow so palpable that it felt intrusive to disturb. She was as much a part of the All Saints' Day tradition as the lighting of candles for the departed. One year, a young, inquisitive historian named Arthur moved to the village. He was fascinated by local folklore, and naturally, the tale of the spectral parishioner caught his immediate attention. He spent months poring over old church records, town archives, and dusty diaries, determined to uncover the identity of this mysterious woman. He listened patiently to the elders, piecing together fragments of sightings and second-hand accounts that stretched back nearly a century. The breakthrough came from a faded baptismal record dated 1885. A name: Ilara. The record was cross-referenced with a marriage certificate and, tragically, a death certificate from just a few years later. The story began to form. Ilara was a young woman, deeply in love with her husband, a sailor named Thomas. They were inseparable, their joy a bright light in the small community. One autumn, Thomas's ship was caught in a brutal, unexpected storm in the North Atlantic. Weeks turned into months with no word. Elara refused to give up hope. Every single day, she would come to the church, sit in the last pew, the one with the clearest view of the path leading from the sea, and pray for his safe return. She prayed for a miracle, her faith a burning ember against the cold winds of despair. But Thomas never came back. His ship was declared lost at sea, with all hands. The official date of his presumed death was recorded as November 1st, All Saints' Day. The news shattered Elara. Her heart, they said, simply gave out. She passed away not long after, consumed by a grief too vast for her mortal body to contain. Following the clues, Arthur walked out of the church and into the ancient cemetery that bordered it. The air was crisp, the fallen leaves crunching under his feet. He searched among the weathered headstones, moss and time obscuring many of the names. And then he found it. A simple, elegant stone, partially hidden beneath an overgrown ivy. The inscription was faint, but still legible. Elara, beloved wife, reunited with her Thomas in the arms of the Lord. The stone was cold to the touch. Arthur stood there for a long moment, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Elara wasn't just a visitor to the church, she was a permanent resident of its sacred grounds. Her spirit, bound by love and unending hope, was still keeping its vigil. She wasn't waiting for a miracle anymore. She was simply remembering. The next All Saints' Day, Arthur attended the service. And there she was, the woman in the last pew, her form as ethereal and constant as ever. But now he saw her not as a ghost to be feared or a mystery to be solved, but as a testament to a love that time could not erase. He saw a soul returning to the place where her heart had last found solace, praying not for a return, but in memory of a love that was eternal. As the service concluded, Arthur didn't watch for her to disappear. Instead, he bowed his own head and whispered a small prayer for Elara and Thomas. He understood now. She didn't need to leave the church through the doors because, in a way, she was already home. Her story had become a part of the church's very stones, a poignant reminder that some bonds are so strong, not even death can break them. The lady in the last pew wasn't a haunting, she was a love story, told in silence year after year. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the story of Elara. If you enjoyed this tale, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the mysteries that surround us. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, stay curious. In the heart of a sleepy, fog-draped village there stood a small stone chapel, its steeple a lonely finger pointing towards the heavens. For centuries, it had been the town's silent keeper of secrets, its pews holding the prayers and grief of generations. Father Michael was its latest custodian, a man whose faith was as solid and weathered as the chapel's ancient stones. His days began before the sun, in the quiet solitude of the early morning, preparing for the day's services. But one Tuesday, a sound, as ethereal as it was unexpected, broke the pre-dawn stillness. It was singing. A choir, their voices rising in a hymn so pure and resonant it seemed to make the very air vibrate. Father Michael paused, his hand hovering over the communion wafers. He knew every soul in the village. He knew the choir members by name, by their off-key notes and their Sunday best. This was not them. This choir was different. Their harmony was perfect, flawless, a sound not of this world. He stepped out from the sacristy, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The chapel was deserted. The pews were vacant, bathed in the soft gray light filtering through the stained glass windows. Yet the singing continued, a beautiful, haunting melody that seemed to come from the stones themselves, from the very air he was breathing. It was a hymn of farewell, a song of peace, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. He stood alone, a solitary audience for a choir he could not see. The spectral hymn faded with the first rays of dawn. leaving a silence more profound than before. Father Michael, deeply unsettled, walked towards the main altar. The large, leather-bound altar book, where the names of the faithful were recorded for prayer, lay open. He hadn't touched it yet this morning. His heart hammered against his ribs as he looked down at the page. There, in elegant, unfamiliar cursive, was a list of names. He read the first one, then the second, and a cold dread washed over him. He knew these names. They were the names of the 5 people most recently laid to rest in the churchyard, souls who had departed this world just weeks before. It was as if they had returned for one final service, their voices the last echo of their time on earth. The phenomenon repeated itself. Every Tuesday before sunrise, the disembodied choir would fill the chapel with their heavenly music, and every Tuesday Father Michael would find a new list of names in the altar book, the names of the village's most recently deceased. The news, as it always does in small towns, began to trickle out. Whispers turned into stories, and stories into local legend. People called it the choir that sang with no voices. Some were terrified, avoiding the chapel grounds after dusk. Others were drawn by a morbid curiosity, hoping to catch a strain of the ghostly melody. A few, however, found comfort in it. The families of the departed saw it as a sign, a beautiful final farewell from their loved ones, a confirmation that they had found peace and were singing with the angels. A young woman named Ilara, whose grandmother was among the first names to appear in the book, started visiting the chapel every Tuesday morning. She would sit in the back pew, not to hear the ghosts, but to feel a connection to the grandmother she missed so dearly. She told Father Michael, "It's not scary, Father. It's beautiful. It's like she's telling me she's okay." Her perspective began to shift the village's fear into something closer to acceptance and even reverence. The ghostly choir was no longer a haunting. It was a blessing, a sacred weekly event that wove the worlds of the living and the dead together in a tapestry of song. Father Michael, initially unnerved, began to see it this way too. He started announcing the names from the book during his morning service not as a grim reminder of loss, but as a celebration of lives lived, a final encore for the souls who had once prayed in these very pews. He even took it upon himself to research the hymn. Digging through the church's oldest archives, he discovered it was an ancient lullaby, a song of passage meant to guide souls peacefully from one life to the next. It hadn't been sung in the church for over 200 years. The spirits weren't just singing. They were performing a forgotten ritual, a rite of their own. This discovery changed everything. The Tuesday morning service was transformed. It became a bridge between memory and eternity. Father Michael would light a candle for each name written in the book as the ethereal music filled the air. He would lead the small, growing congregation of family members and curious townsfolk not in fear, but in quiet contemplation. They would sit together in the pre-dawn darkness, sharing in this mysterious sacred concert. Years passed. Father Michael grew old, his hair turning the color of winter frost. The choir continued its faithful weekly performance. It became a cherished tradition, a unique and beautiful part of the village's identity. When Father Michael eventually passed away, the entire village gathered for his funeral. The following Tuesday, the new young priest entered the chapel before sunrise, a little nervous, wondering if the choir would sing for the man who had been their sole audience for so long. As the first light of dawn touched the stained glass windows, the familiar celestial hymn began to swell, filling the empty space with its perfect harmony. The young priest walked to the altar and opened the book. At the top of a fresh page in that same elegant, otherworldly script was a single name: Father Michael. His own flock had come to sing him home. The legend of the choir lives on, a testament to the enduring connections that not even death can sever. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound messages come not from the voices we can see, but from the echoes they leave behind in the quietest corners of the world. What do you think? A terrifying haunting or a beautiful miracle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you do not miss our next exploration into the mysterious and the unknown. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever heard a sound that simply shouldn't be there? A whisper in an empty room? A footstep on the stairs when you're home alone? Tonight, we're journeying to a small, forgotten village nestled deep in the countryside where a mystery still echoes through the valley, the mystery of the bells that rang by themselves. Our story centers on the old stone church of St. Giles, a place that has stood for centuries, its spire a silent finger pointing towards the heavens. The church is famous for its bell tower, home to 3 heavy bronze bells, each with its own name: Faith, Hope, and Charity. For generations, their chimes marked the hours, called the faithful to prayer, and celebrated weddings. But their most important job was to toll for the departed, a final, solemn farewell. Ringing these bells was no small feat. It required a team of strong bell ringers, pulling on thick, coarse ropes that ran down the height of the tower. The sound was immense, a deep, resonant peal that could be heard for miles around. One bitter winter, a wave of sickness swept through the village. It was a grim, relentless time. The doctor was overwhelmed, and nearly every family lost someone they loved. The air grew heavy with sorrow, and the constant, mournful tolling of faith, hope, and charity became the soundtrack to their grief. The bell ringers, exhausted and heartsick, pulled the ropes day after day, their own hands raw, their own families suffering. Eventually, the sickness claimed the head bell ringer, a kind, elderly man named Thomas, and his 2 apprentices soon after. With no one left to ring them, the bells of St. Giles fell silent. The silence was, in its own way, more deafening than the tolling. It felt unnatural, as if the village had lost its very heartbeat. The dead were being laid to rest without the traditional honors, a quiet procession to the churchyard that felt incomplete, and this weighed heavily on the survivors. They prayed in their homes and in the pews of the cold church, not just for the souls of their departed, but for a sign, any sign, that they were not forgotten, that their final journey was acknowledged. Then, one moonless night, it happened. As the clock in the village square was about to strike midnight, a sound rolled across the frosted fields. Bong! A single, clear, powerful chime from the church tower. The villagers who were still awake froze, listening. Had they imagined it? Bong! It came again, deeper this time, the unmistakable voice of hope. Then a third, the highest and sweetest of the 3. Bong! Charity! 3 distinct rings, echoing in the frozen air, then silence. The next morning, the village was buzzing. Everyone had heard it. The village elder, a man whose face was a roadmap of long years and local lore, gathered the anxious folk in the square. He listened to their stories, nodding his gray head. A few brave men had rushed to the church right after the ringing. They found the tower door locked, just as it had been for weeks. Inside, dust lay thick and undisturbed on the floor. The great ropes hung perfectly still, their ends coiled neatly as they had been left. There was no one there. No footprints in the snow around the church, no sign of any human presence. It was impossible. The bells were immensely heavy. The wind couldn't move them, and birds couldn't budge them. It required coordinated, powerful force. Yet they had rung. The elder, his voice raspy but firm, offered an explanation that sent a shiver through the crowd. It wasn't a ghost story to frighten children, but something else, something deeper. He said it was an answer. For weeks, he explained, we have prayed for our dead. We have mourned that we could not give them their final farewell. Last night, they answered us. He believed that the spirits of the departed, hearing the sorrow of the living, had returned to ring the bells for themselves. The first chime was for the souls who had passed. The second was to comfort the families left behind. And the third was a promise of reunion, a peal of hope for the future. It wasn't a haunting, it was a final, loving goodbye. The story spread, passed down from one generation to the next. The bells of St. Giles never rang on their own again. New bell ringers eventually took up the ropes, and life in the village slowly returned to normal. But the memory of that one impossible midnight never faded. It became a cornerstone of their history, a piece of folklore that brought comfort rather than fear. It taught them that even in the deepest silence of grief, love can find a way to make itself heard, to bridge the gap between this world and the next, and to answer a prayer with the beautiful, impossible sound of a bell ringing in an empty tower. What do you think? Was it a miracle? A collective auditory hallucination born of grief? Or was it, as the elders said, the dead answering the prayers of the living? The beauty of a story like this is that it doesn't need a definitive answer. It lives in the mystery, in the space between what we know and what we believe. It reminds us that there are some things in this world that science can't quite explain, and maybe, just maybe, shouldn't. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the mysterious and the magical. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more tales from the crossroads of history and folklore. I'd love to hear your own family stories or local legends in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're journeying into the hushed corners of a place you'd least expect to find a haunting: a church. These sacred spaces are built for light, for peace, and for sanctuary. But, as history has shown us, sometimes the deepest shadows cling to the most hallowed ground. Our story takes us to an old parish, a place of community and quiet prayer, where one man's mundane task turned into a chilling encounter he would never forget. It was the eve of All Saints' Day, a time of remembrance when the veil between worlds is said to be at its thinnest. The church's caretaker, a man named Arthur, had served the parish for over 20 years. He was a man of routine and quiet faith, not given to flights of fancy or ghost stories. His duties were simple, familiar, and comforting. On this particular evening, as dusk painted the stained glass windows in shades of violet and deep orange, Arthur's final task was to prepare the ancient stone baptismal font for the next day's services. The church was empty and silent, save for the low hum of the old heating system and the distant rumble of a passing train. Arthur enjoyed this time of day. The building seemed to breathe around him. Its long history settled in the polished wood of the pews and the cool, worn flagstones under his feet. He fetched a heavy jug of purified water and walked toward the narthex, where the font stood as it had for centuries. It was a massive, 8-sided basin of granite, its surface cool and smooth beneath his weathered hands. Countless generations had begun their spiritual journey right here. With a soft grunt, he began to pour the water. It cascaded into the stone basin, the sound echoing in the vast, empty space. The clear liquid settled, its surface becoming a perfect dark mirror reflecting the vaulted ceiling high above. Arthur leaned over, intending to check for any dust or impurities that might have settled at the bottom. The dim overhead lights cast a soft glow, and in the water he saw his own reflection looking back at him, a familiar, tired face framed by graying hair. But then, something was wrong. His reflection was not alone. Just over his shoulder, another face materialized in the water. It was pale and indistinct, its features wavering as if seen through heat haze. Arthur froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was completely alone in the church. He had locked the heavy oak doors himself an hour ago. He straightened up, whipping his head around. There was nothing, only empty pews and long creeping shadows. The air was still and silent. Hesitantly, he forced himself to look back into the font. The water was still. His own reflection stared back, wide-eyed and pale. But the other face was still there, clearer now. It was the face of a man, gaunt and with dark, hollow eyes. Its expression was neutral, almost curious. Arthur felt a cold dread snake up his spine. This was impossible. It had to be a trick of the light, a distortion on the water's surface, his mind playing tricks on him in the deepening twilight. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a reflection from one of the stained glass figures, warped by the water. He shifted his position, moving his head from side to side. His own reflection moved with him, but the other face remained stubbornly in place, hovering just behind his shoulder in the watery mirror. It didn't belong to any of the saints in the windows. Its features were too modern, yet its presence felt ancient. It was an intruder in this sacred reflection. And then the impossible happened. The corners of the spectral mouth in the water slowly, deliberately, turned upwards into a wide, unnatural smile. It was a silent, knowing grin that held no warmth, no joy, just a chilling, vacant amusement. Arthur's own face in the reflection remained a mask of frozen terror. He wasn't smiling. No one in the entire empty church was smiling. Yet this phantom, this shadow in the baptismal water, was grinning directly at him. A strangled gasp escaped his lips. He stumbled back, knocking over a small prayer book stand with a clatter that shattered the silence. The sound seemed to break the spell. He squeezed his eyes shut, then forced them open, his gaze darting back to the font. The water was just water. The reflection was just his own, terrified face staring back at him from the dark surface. The other face, the smiling specter, was gone as if it had never been there. Arthur didn't finish his duties that night. He fled, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the silence of the churchyard. He didn't look back. For the first time in 20 years, he left the church unlocked, the water sitting in the font, a dark, placid eye in the center of the empty building. He never told the vicar what he saw. How could he explain it? A trick of the light? A moment of madness? But Arthur knew what he saw. He had looked into the hallowed water and seen something unholy looking back, something that lingered in the shadows of a sacred place, waiting for a quiet moment to reveal its chilling smile. He never again prepared the font alone in the evening. The memory of that smile, reflected in the still, dark water, was a secret he would carry with him, a haunting reminder that even in the brightest of places, some shadows have a life of their own. What do you think Arthur saw that night? Was it a restless spirit tied to the church, or something else entirely, drawn to the sanctity of the baptismal font? Let me know your theories in the comments below. These personal accounts are what make the paranormal so fascinating and so deeply unsettling. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into the unknown. Until next time, stay curious and be well. Have you ever felt a presence in a place so holy you thought it must be an angel? Or perhaps something else entirely? Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that blurs the line between the sacred and the spectral. A story that took place in the hushed reverence of a candlelit prayer room. It was a late autumn evening, the kind where the air outside is crisp and carries the scent of rain and fallen leaves. Inside the old stone chapel, the evening prayer service was underway. The room was bathed in the warm, flickering glow of dozens of votive candles, their tiny flames dancing like captured stars. The air was thick with the rich, heady aroma of melting beeswax and the sweet, almost cloying scent of frankincense. Parishioners were scattered among the pews, heads bowed, their whispered prayers a gentle hum that filled the sacred space. I was there, near the back, finding solace in the quiet repetition of the liturgy. My eyes drifted towards the altar, a grand structure of carved marble, where the priest stood leading the service. And that's when I saw her. To the side of the altar, partially obscured by a large stone pillar, stood a figure. It was a woman, or at least it had the shape of one. She was draped entirely in white, a soft, flowing fabric that seemed to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it. A delicate white veil covered her head and face, rendering her features completely anonymous. At first, I didn't think much of it. Perhaps a nun from a visiting order, or a woman in deep personal prayer, choosing to remain veiled. But as the service continued, a strange stillness about her began to unnerve me. Everyone else swayed slightly, shifted their weight, coughed, or turned a page in their prayer book. She, however, remained perfectly, unnaturally still. It was as if she were a statue carved from moonlight. My curiosity got the better of me. I tried to catch a glimpse of her feet, but the long white garment pooled on the floor, obscuring them. I listened intently, straining my ears over the murmur of prayer, for the sound of her breath or the slightest rustle of her clothing. There was nothing, just the crackle of candle wicks and the priest's resonant voice echoing through the nave. Then a new scent began to weave its way through the incense. It was the unmistakable, perfumed fragrance of lilies, fresh lilies, as if a bouquet had just been placed on the altar. But there were no new flowers. The scent seemed to emanate directly from where the veiled woman stood. The combination of incense and lilies was overwhelming, almost dizzying, a fragrance both heavenly and funereal. The service progressed, and my attention remained fixed on the mysterious figure. I watched as people went up to the front for communion, passing right by the spot where she stood. No one seemed to notice her. They didn't alter their path, didn't glance in her direction, didn't even flinch as they moved through the very space she occupied. It was as if she were completely invisible to them, a private apparition meant only for my eyes. My heart began to pound against my ribs. This was no ordinary parishioner. As the final blessing was given and the congregation began to stir, I kept my eyes locked on her. I half expected her to turn and walk away, to join the slow procession of people heading for the exit. But she didn't. Instead, as the last notes of the closing hymn faded, she began to dissolve. It wasn't a sudden disappearance. It was a slow, graceful fade, like smoke dissipating in the air. The white veil thinned, becoming translucent, the solid form behind it turning to mist. Within seconds, she was gone. The only thing that remained was the scent. The overpowering fragrance of incense and lilies lingered in that one spot by the altar, a spectral perfume hanging in the air long after the figure had vanished. I slowly got to my feet, my legs feeling weak. I approached the altar, my footsteps echoing in the now emptying chapel. The air was cooler where she had been standing, a distinct drop in temperature that raised goosebumps on my arms. The smell was so strong, so real. I later spoke to one of the older church custodians, a man who had worked there for over 50 years. I described what I had seen, expecting him to be skeptical. Instead, he just nodded slowly, a knowing look in his tired eyes. He told me stories, whispered legends of the Lily Bride. Decades ago, a young woman was set to be married in that very chapel. On the morning of her wedding, just hours before she was to walk down the aisle, she was involved in a tragic accident and passed away. She was buried in her wedding dress, her white veil, holding her bridal bouquet of white lilies. They say her spirit, unwilling to leave the place where she was meant to find her greatest happiness, returns from time to time. She doesn't moan or weep. She simply stands by the altar during evening prayers, a quiet, peaceful observer, forever waiting for a wedding that will never come. She never harms anyone, never interacts. She just watches, surrounded by the scent of her bridal flowers and the holy incense, a soft figure draped in white in the candle room. So if you are ever in an old church and you smell the sudden, sweet scent of lilies mixed with incense, take a look towards the altar. You might not be alone. You might just catch a glimpse of the white veil, the gentle spirit who still waits for her perfect day. Thank you so much for listening to my story tonight. If you have your own unexplained encounters, I'd love to read them in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe and keep your eyes open. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that sits right at the intersection of faith, mystery, and maybe even a little bit of fear. It's the tale of a small, quiet town, a centuries-old church, and an event so strange it left the community divided and searching for answers. This is the story of the cross that turned on its own. Our story takes place in the peaceful village of Oakhaven, a place where time seems to slow down, and traditions are held dear. At the heart of Oakhaven stands St. Jude's Church, a beautiful stone building that has been the center of community life for over 200 years. Inside, hanging high above the chancel arch, is a large hand-carved wooden cross. It's not ornate or gilded, but its simple, dark wood has absorbed the prayers, hopes, and sorrows of generations. For as long as anyone could remember, this cross faced the altar, a symbol of devotion directed towards the sacred space. Until one Tuesday morning, when everything changed. It was Mrs. Gable, the church organist and a woman of unshakable routine, who made the discovery. She arrived at precisely 8 a.m. to practice for the upcoming Sunday service, just as she had for the past 40 years. She unlocked the heavy oak doors, the familiar scent of old wood and beeswax greeting her. She switched on the lights, and as the nave was bathed in a soft glow, her eyes were drawn upwards. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her music sheets slipped from her hand, scattering across the stone floor. The cross had moved. It had rotated a full 180 degrees on its heavy iron chain. Instead of facing the altar, it was now looking out, directly at the pews, at the empty space where the congregation would sit. Mrs. Gable, a practical woman not given to flights of fancy, first assumed it was a prank. Teenagers, perhaps, with too much time on their hands. She immediately called Father Michael, the parish priest. He arrived within minutes, his expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. Together, they examined the cross. It was suspended from a thick, rusted chain attached to a heavy wooden beam in the ceiling, at least 20 feet high. There was no ladder nearby, no scuff marks on the floor, no sign of forced entry. The dust on the beam above was thick and undisturbed. How could anyone have moved it? And more importantly, why? Word of the turned cross spread through Oakhaven like wildfire. By noon, a small crowd had gathered outside St. Jude's. Father Michael, trying to maintain a sense of calm, allowed people to come inside and see for themselves. The reactions were as varied as the townspeople themselves. Some whispered, their eyes wide with awe. Others scoffed, convinced there was a logical explanation. The community, once united by their shared faith and history, was now split into two distinct camps. The first group saw the event as a miracle, a divine sign of protection. Old Man Hemlock, a farmer whose family had lived in the valley for generations, was one of the most vocal proponents of this view. He stood in the aisle, his weathered face looking up at the cross, and declared it a blessing. He believed the cross had turned to face the people, to watch over them, to shield the congregation from some unseen danger. It was a gesture of divine guardianship, a reassurance that they were not alone. This idea brought comfort to many, especially the elderly who felt a deep, personal connection to the church. They saw it as a sign that their faith was being rewarded, that their little town was being specially looked after. But there was another, more ominous interpretation. This second group believed the cross had turned not as a shield, but as a warning. They argued that the cross turning its back on the altar, the most sacred part of the church, was a sign of God's displeasure. Sarah, a young mother who ran the local bakery, voiced the fears of many. She wondered if the town had strayed, if its people had become complacent in their faith. Was this a call to repentance? A sign that something terrible was on the horizon if they didn't change their ways? This interpretation cast a shadow of anxiety over the village. People started looking at their neighbors differently, wondering what sins the community was being judged for. The cross was no longer a symbol of comfort, but a silent accuser. As the days turned into weeks, the mystery only deepened. Father Michael, caught between the two factions, tried to be a voice of reason. He organized a town meeting in the church hall, hoping an open discussion would ease the tension. But the meeting only highlighted the divide. People who had been lifelong friends argued passionately, each convinced their interpretation was the correct one. The miracle camp accused the warning camp of fear-mongering, while the warning camp accused the miracle camp of willful ignorance. Engineers and experts were called in. A structural engineer from the city came to inspect the cross and its mountings. He spent a full day examining the beam, the chain, and the hook. His official report concluded that while the chain was old, it was structurally sound. He could find no mechanical reason for the cross to have rotated. Spontaneous rotation of an object of this weight and suspension is, from an engineering perspective, impossible, he wrote. He suggested a subtle, external force, but couldn't guess what it might be. This professional opinion only added fuel to the fire. For the believers, impossible meant miraculous. For the skeptics, it just meant the real cause hadn't been found yet. A local historian, a man named Arthur Finch, offered a different perspective. He spent days poring over the church's ancient records in the town archive. He discovered a faded entry in a journal from the late 1700s, written by the church's first vicar. The entry described a great and unsettling wind that had swept through the valley, causing the church bell to ring on its own and the sacred cross to turn and face its flock. The vicar at the time had interpreted it as a sign to prepare for a harsh winter. And indeed, that year was followed by one of the most severe winters on record. This historical precedent gave weight to the warning theory, and a new wave of unease settled over Oakhaven as autumn approached. The mystery of the turned cross became a part of Oakhaven's identity. Tourists began to visit, not for the village's quaint charm, but to see the miracle cross of St. Jude's. The town was featured in a few regional newspapers and on a late-night radio show about unexplained phenomena. For a brief time, Oakhaven was famous. But what became of the cross? Father Michael, seeking to restore peace and unity, made a decision. After weeks of prayer and deliberation, he announced that the cross would be left exactly as it was, facing the congregation. In his Sunday sermon, he addressed the town directly. He said, "Whether you see this as a sign of protection or a call to be better, both interpretations lead us to the same place. Both ask us to look after one another. Both ask us to strengthen our community and our faith. Perhaps the meaning isn't in why it turned, but in how it makes us turn towards each other." His words had a profound effect. The tension in the village began to dissolve. People started to see that the two interpretations weren't mutually exclusive. A sign of protection could also serve as a reminder not to take that protection for granted. A warning could be a call to come together for mutual support. The cross, once a symbol of division, slowly became a symbol of a new, more thoughtful unity. The people of Oakhaven learned to live with the mystery. They accepted that some things just can't be explained. The cross hangs there still, a silent watcher over the pews, a constant reminder of the day their quiet little town was touched by the inexplicable. What do you think happened? Was it a miracle, a warning, a clever prank, or some forgotten law of physics? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Stories like this remind us that the world is still full of wonder and mystery, and sometimes the most important answers are the ones we find within ourselves and our communities. Thanks for joining me on this journey to Oakhaven. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe for more tales of the strange and unexplained, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. We'll see you in the next video. Have you ever heard a story that sends a shiver down your spine, but also warms your heart at the same time? Today, I have one of those for you. It's a tale from a small, snow-covered town, a place where winters are long and the frost bites deep, the kind of place where legends are whispered over hot mugs of cocoa, and the line between this world and the next feels just a little bit thinner. This story is about a cemetery, a promise, and a grave that refused to grow cold. Picture this. It's the dead of winter in a town nestled deep in the mountains. Snow blankets everything in a pristine, silent layer of white. The air is so cold it stings your lungs with every breath. In this town, there's an old cemetery on a hill overlooking the valley. It's a peaceful, somber place where generations of townsfolk rest under weathered headstones. During winter, the entire cemetery freezes over. The ground is as hard as iron, and a thick layer of frost glitters on every surface, making it look like a kingdom of ice. The wind whispers through the bare branches of ancient oak trees, the only sound in the profound silence. For years, this was the way of things. Winter would come, the cemetery would freeze, and life would go on. But one year, something changed. It started with a whisper, a rumor that spread through the town like wildfire. A group of teenagers, daring each other on a cold night, had stumbled upon something impossible. They had been wandering through the frozen graveyard, their boots crunching on the icy snow, when one of them tripped and fell against a particular headstone. As he pushed himself up, his bare hand brushed against the stone, and he recoiled, not from the cold, but from an unexpected warmth. He told his friends, who, of course, laughed it off. Warmth? In the middle of a frozen cemetery? It had to be a prank, or maybe the cold was playing tricks on his mind. But curiosity got the better of them. One by one, they reached out and touched the grave, and each one felt it. While every other stone, every patch of ground, every metal fence was coated in a frigid layer of frost, this one grave was inexplicably, impossibly warm. Not hot, but a gentle, living warmth, like a hand held out from a cozy fireplace. The ground around it was soft. The snow melted in a perfect circle, revealing the dark, rich earth beneath. The grave belonged to an old woman named Ilara. She had been the town's librarian for over 50 years. A kind, gentle soul with a twinkle in her eye and a story for every occasion. Ilara loved books, but more than that, she loved people. She knew everyone's name, their favorite authors, their triumphs, and their heartbreaks. Her library wasn't just a building full of books, it was the heart of the community, a warm and welcoming haven for everyone. She had passed away peacefully the previous spring, and the entire town had mourned her. The news of the warm grave spread quickly. At first, people were skeptical. They came up with logical explanations. A geothermal vent, a chemical reaction in the soil, some sort of electrical anomaly. Scientists and geologists were even called in from a nearby city. They brought their fancy equipment, took soil samples, and ran tests. They scanned the ground for heat signatures and measured temperatures. But they found nothing. No vents, no chemicals, no electricity. The warmth was localized to Ilara's grave and a small patch of ground around it, and there was absolutely no scientific reason for it. As the scientific explanations dwindled, the townspeople started to turn to their own stories, to the memories they had of Ilara. And that's when the real heart of the mystery began to unfold. They remembered Ilara not just as a librarian, but as a keeper of promises. She had a unique gift. If you told her a secret or a heartfelt message you were too afraid to say, she would hold it for you. A message is a bird, she used to say. It needs to fly to the right person at the right time. I'll keep it safe until it's ready to take flight. People would confide in her their unspoken loves, their deepest regrets, their words of forgiveness they couldn't yet utter. And Ilara, with her calm and reassuring smile, would nod and say, "I'll hold on to it for you. Don't you worry." She never wrote them down. She just remembered. She carried the weight of the town's unspoken words in her heart. A young man named Leo heard the stories of the warm grave and felt a pull he couldn't ignore. Years ago, he had a terrible argument with his father. Harsh words were exchanged, and a deep rift formed between them. Pride kept them apart. Leo had moved away, and while he always meant to call, to apologize, to bridge that gap, he never did. Then his father passed away suddenly. Leo was consumed by guilt and regret. The last words he had spoken to his father were words of anger. Shortly before his father's death, Leo had visited his hometown and, in a moment of desperation, had confided in Ilara. He told her everything, the fight, the regret, the love for his father that was buried under years of stubborn pride. He told her all the things he wished he could say to his dad. "I love you. I'm sorry. I miss you." Ilara had listened patiently, her kind eyes full of understanding, and she had made him her usual promise. "I'll hold on to it for you, Leo. It'll find its way when the time is right." Now, standing in the cold, Leo remembered that promise. Driven by a feeling he couldn't explain, he made his way up the hill to the cemetery. He found the crowd gathered around Ilara's grave, their breath misting in the frigid air. He pushed his way through, his heart pounding. He saw the snowless patch of earth, the headstone free of frost. He hesitated for a moment, then knelt and placed his hand on the grave. The warmth was real. It seeped into his cold fingers, a gentle, pulsing energy that felt alive. It felt like comfort. It felt like forgiveness. And as he knelt there, with his hand on the warm earth, the words he had told Ilara all those years ago came flooding back into his mind, clear as day. "I love you, Dad. I'm sorry." In that moment, surrounded by the silence of the frozen cemetery, Leo felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. The heavy burden of guilt he had carried for so long finally began to lift. It was as if the message, held safely by Ilara all this time, had finally been delivered. Leo wasn't the only one. Others came forward with similar stories. A woman who had never told her sister how much she meant to her before she moved across the country. A man who regretted not thanking a teacher who had changed his life. One by one, they came to Ilara's grave. They would touch the warm stone, and in the quiet of their own hearts, they would feel a sense of closure, a message delivered, a promise fulfilled. The grave wasn't just warm. It was a conduit for love, for forgiveness, for all the words left unsaid. It was Ilara, even after she was gone, still taking care of her town, still delivering their most important messages. The warmth, they say, lasted the entire winter. It was a small, persistent miracle in the heart of the biting cold. And when the spring thaw finally came and the rest of the cemetery began to soften, the warmth of Ilara's grave slowly faded, blending in with the returning life of the season. The snow melted, the grass grew green, and the flowers bloomed. Her work was done. The messages had been delivered. The grave never warmed like that again. But the story lives on. It became a legend in that small town, a reminder that some bonds are stronger than frost, and that love and kindness can create a warmth that even death cannot extinguish. It reminds us that it's never too late to say what's in our hearts, and that sometimes the most important messages are the ones that are finally set free. Thank you so much for joining me for this story today. If it touched your heart, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel for more tales that explore the mysteries that surround us. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever heard a story like this? Until next time, take care and hold your loved ones close. Have you ever wondered what happens to the memories of those who have no one left to remember them? In a small, wind-swept village nestled between rolling hills, there was a tradition as old as the cobblestones themselves. Every year on All Saints' Day, the villagers would gather in the ancient stone church of St. Giles to light a candle for their departed loved ones. The church would glow, a warm, flickering beacon against the encroaching dusk, each flame a symbol of a life cherished and a story remembered. This year was no different. Families came and went, their whispers and prayers filling the sacred space. They lit candles for grandparents who told tall tales, for parents whose lullabies still echoed in their hearts, and for friends taken too soon. The rows of candles on the grand iron stands were a tapestry of love and loss, each one burning brightly. But in a quiet, overlooked corner of the church near a dusty alcove stood a smaller, solitary stand. This was the stand for the forgotten, for the souls whose names had faded from living memory. It was a place for strangers, for wanderers, for those whose family lines had ended. Each year, the kind-hearted old sexton, Mr. Abernathy, would light a handful of candles on this stand himself. "Everyone deserves a light," he would murmur, his voice raspy with age. He'd use simple tallow candles, the cheapest he could find, a humble gesture for the unknown. As the evening drew to a close, the villagers returned to their homes, leaving the church to its silent vigil. Mr. Abernathy locked the heavy oak doors, the sound echoing through the empty nave. The next morning, as was his routine, he went to clean up. He expected to find puddles of hardened wax and burnt-out wicks, and he did on all the family stands. The memories had been honored, and the flames had died. But when he approached the corner for the forgotten, he stopped dead in his tracks. The candles he had lit, the simple, cheap tallow candles, were still burning. Not just flickering, but burning with a steady, serene, and almost ethereal light. He leaned in closer, his brow furrowed in confusion. There was no pool of melted wax at their base. The candles themselves hadn't shrunk even a millimeter. It was as if they were consuming nothing, yet producing a pure, unwavering light. He touched the side of one. It was cool, smooth, not even warm. Bewildered, he decided to leave them be. A curious thing, he mumbled to himself. Perhaps a draft. But there were no drafts in that still, quiet corner. The next day he returned, half expecting the mystery to have resolved itself. But it hadn't. The candles for the forgotten were still burning. Brightly, steadily, without wax. News of the strange phenomenon began to ripple through the village. At first, it was quiet whispers over garden fences and in the local bakery. "Did you hear about the candles at St. Giles?" Soon, curiosity got the better of the villagers, and they started to visit the church outside of normal service times. They would stand in small, hushed groups, gazing at the inexplicable flames. The candles for their own families had burned out in a single night, as they always did. Yet these, the candles for the nameless, endured. The village priest, Father Michael, was a practical man. He examined the candles, tapping them, sniffing them. He found no scientific explanation. There were no hidden wires, no gas lines, no trickery he could discern. He admitted, with a shrug of his shoulders and a twinkle in his eye, that some things are beyond our understanding. Perhaps, he suggested to his flock, this is a gentle reminder. A reminder of what? The villagers began to think. As they stood before the miraculous flames, their thoughts turned from their own immediate grief to a wider, more profound sense of connection. They started to wonder about the people these candles represented. Who were the soldiers who never returned from a long-forgotten war? Who were the children who died in infancy, before their names could be carved into a family tree? Who were the lonely travelers who passed through the village centuries ago and were laid to rest in the churchyard, their stories lost to time? The corner of the church, once overlooked and dusty, became a focal point. People began leaving small offerings. A single wildflower, a smooth stone from the river. One woman, a baker named Ilara, started bringing a small, freshly baked loaf of bread each morning. "My grandmother used to say that a soul can't journey on an empty stomach," she explained softly to anyone who asked. An old carpenter, whose hands were gnarled from a lifetime of work, painstakingly carved small wooden birds and left them by the stand. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. The candles became more than a mystery. They became an inspiration. The villagers began actively seeking out the stories of the forgotten. They spent afternoons in the church archives, deciphering faded ink on brittle parish records. They found names: Agnes, who worked as a scullery maid in the 1800s, Thomas, a stonemason who helped build the church spire but whose own grave was unmarked. They weren't just names anymore. With each discovery, the villagers would say the name aloud in the church, a simple act of recognition. And as they did, some swore that the cool, steady flames of the candles flickered for just a moment, as if in acknowledgement. As if a forgotten story was finally being heard across the veil of time. The village changed. The act of remembering the forgotten brought the community closer. They started a project to tend to the neglected graves in the churchyard, clearing weeds and planting flowers. They compiled a book, The Remembered, filled with the names and the small fragments of stories they had uncovered. The corner of the church was no longer a place of lonely charity, but a vibrant testament to the idea that no one is ever truly gone as long as someone, anyone, makes the effort to remember. The candles? They kept burning. For weeks they cast their gentle, unwavering light. They didn't burn out until the morning of the first snowfall, when the entire village was blanketed in a pristine, quiet white. Mr. Abernathy entered the church to find the corner in stillness, the flames finally gone. There was no smoke, no soot, just the smooth, untouched candles standing as if they had never been lit at all. There was no sadness, though. The miracle wasn't that the candles had burned for so long without fuel. The real miracle was the warmth they had ignited in the hearts of the living. They had taught a small village and all of us that the most powerful fuel for any light is memory, and the most enduring flame is the one we light for someone else. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more tales that explore the quiet magic of the world. See you next time.